Bam. I'm in the coaching channel. Oh, you're here. Sweet, you already got it. So, dude.
Good evening. Hey.
Hey.
So I've pretty much just split up. I think you've read the email already, but I'll go over again for people that are listening in for you. There's three big things that I'd like to talk about with in terms of mentality. And when was the last time we talked? Was it like last year, around about this time, near the start of the year?
Yeah, I
Or
would
was it
think.
like a year and a half?
I think it was about a year.
About a year, yeah. So we talked about sitting down and utilizing, your own head while you're playing instead of focusing on the game so much, allowing yourself to relax and enjoy the game and realize that there's an opponent on the other side, and accepting that it is a human versus human game. It's not just some, robotic innovation on the other side. But at least as I've begun to improve and watch myself like climb the ranks and do well, especially now because they recently switched how the servers work. If you've noticed, since the last patch with the Widowmine change, where the Widowmines don't cloak after they've shot,
Mm-hmm.
I'm only playing against other Australians on North America. So I've fully made the transition back over to Korea, and a big thing on Korea right now has been every game is against a barcode.
Mm-hmm.
Every game, it feels like it's the same crap every game, and it's really hard to humanize them. So I'd like to, number one, find a method to deliberately make someone humanized,
Yeah, well, I
so you
think
can,
in
yeah.
the email you also said that you have reached Korean GM on a barcode.
Yes, last year, yeah.
So the first step would be to articulate what are the reasons that people use a barcode. What do you think? Why would someone do that?
Well, the reasons that I've found, I'm not sure if it's the same for everybody, but what I found really good about it is when you're on a barcode, people just respect the chance that you're just gonna all in them,
Mm-hmm.
because they have no idea who you are, they don't know if they've played you before, and they don't know what strategy you like using. So when they go into the game, you could effectively do any build whatsoever, and they have absolutely no idea.
Mm-hmm.
So I was finding myself playing against players who wouldn't respect that, and I'd get free wins because I'd be doing a 2 base or 3 base all in.
Mm-hmm.
Or I'd be going really greedy with a build, and they'd be playing really safe, and I'd just get a huge economic advantage and just kind of roll them over in the mid to late game. So there was a lot of free wins, let's say, like, for lack of a better word, with those games. That's what I've found. When I've switched over to my named account, I have had a lot of struggles with people just like not getting those free wins, number one, and then number two, finding myself against those barcodes, like trying to scout so much for whatever they could be doing, but
Mm-hmm.
never quite getting on top of it.
Yeah, so the metagaming aspect is definitely a huge edge you can take with the barcode. The one that I was thinking about since you sent the message is the way that it reflects on our reputation in the scene and our sense of embarrassment and shame for losing. So I would guess that by playing on a barcode, not only do you insulate yourself from being metagamed by opponents, you also don't feel quite as upset that someone knows that Vaj fucked up and misclicked or lost a big engagement in a big way and it was really bad. It was just some barcode made a mistake and it's not quite as attached to now someone knows that I just lost this match. So I think that's the element of barcoding that is more to kind of safeguard some of the emotions we experience with our losses in the game. So one thing that I was kind of trying to create as an analogy is the fact that the barcode is used because someone is afraid of something being used against them. Which, if you're thinking about it in terms of like wild animals that are maybe growling at you or they're trying to create some advantage for themselves, they're doing it because they're afraid. So, someone who is barcoding, they're afraid of being stream cheated, metagamed, they're afraid of being kind of called out for behavior. Like, you'll see some barcodes use it to be more BM, because you don't really
Yeah, I've
have
noticed
like,
that one.
oh, I know this person was BMing me, so I can tell Reddit or tell Twitter. It was some barcode, so there's not the same attachment to, I can tarnish my reputation by being BM. If you barcode, your BM, no one knows, it's just some anon. So those are kind of the basic reasons why someone would barcode, is it's less stress, you're less likely to get metagamed. The flip side of having a name is you can create your table image with that opponent using the poker analogy. If they know that you can do those 2 or 3 base all-ins, then they're going to be more cautious of that, and you can use that against them. So that's the flip side, is if you're using a named account, you can make someone think you're going to approach the game in a certain way, and then make some big adjustments. So you don't really need to play as different as you did on your barcode. The main difference would be remembering what you did against them last time, and how you could use that to your advantage and mix it up.
So, but what if you're unable to identify if it's the same barcode or not? So you've been lettering, say you're about 10 games in, and it's about your 9th game against a barcode. It's been the same, whatever that guy's called, the initial default portrait, same number of lines.
Yeah.
And you go, okay, it's just some other guy. Like, I don't feel like I have that advantage, especially when they're a barcode, because I don't know if I've played them before, and I'm trying to use like my practice specifically to touch up a build. Generally, if I'm trying to grind up the ladder, I will mix in these cheeses, but then I'm usually doing that on my barcode as well, just because of that. I don't know, I guess you're right in terms of the being afraid of mucking up, making some really stupid mistakes. So like, I mean, you do it from time to time on your stream, where you like choose the strategy and you'll just go for it, whether it works or not, right?
Yeah.
For me, I feel like I can do that on my barcode, because no matter what, the opponent's like, oh crap, I did not expect that. But if someone's already beaten me, say on my named account, they already have that kind of confidence to do some sort of timing themselves, and then it kind of ruins the little bit of experimentation you were doing.
Yeah, well, the thing that is the constant across all of these barcode versus non-barcode is the matchup. So you could get a bunch of different Terran barcodes over and over again, and you could say, of the 9 games, it felt like the first 7 were one player and then the next 2 were a different player. One thing that I've been working on, trying to get back into, is holding myself accountable for having a sense of the game flow, and that's by the supply and the game clock. So I've lost a couple games against Sal recently, and the main factor is the 4-minute to 5-minute Hellion shove and Liberator harass. I don't have my units in the right place at the right time, so I'm taking a bunch of damage. And it's against him, and there's always the kind of Morpheus is fighting Neo of 2 streamers are fighting each other, but in terms of my personal progress, it's the elements of the game and the timings of when things happen that is more important for me to keep track of than who won recently, should I do something differently this time. It's more of, okay, I know that 4 minutes they can shove those Hellions in, any Terran could shove those in, barcode or up a tree or whomever, and then at 5 minutes, that's when the big harass comes, where it's like Cyclone Hellbat with Liberator harass and that kind of thing. So I would highly recommend having that kind of approach, where it's more based on your knowledge over the course of the match, as opposed to trying to play the human. You can play the human sometimes, but with barcodes existing and not going away, there's that element of, if you're against a non, you need to just play the matchup as opposed to play the person.
So I'm trying to write a note on how to write a little bullet point on that, but I'm trying to understand if if you're focusing on the timing, like you were saying, instead of what kind of things they can do. Say they spawned as Terran, you have to think about things like proxy Rex, things like Hellion run-bys, Liberators, 2-1-1, Cyclone Marine drops, all sorts of things, right? But as soon as I start thinking more about the timings and things, it kind of goes back to the original problem I was having, where I was feeling like I was playing against an AI, and I was getting frustrated at, lashing out at the opponent because they did such and such timing at 6 minutes. And that I've been struggling with. Why did he choose to do that build? So what I'm trying to ask is specifically to be able to look at a barcode and go, how, how can you make them seem like they're a person you're playing against rather than an opponent? Because I found last year when we talked about that, that really helped, uh, you know, actually just being able to grind like a bunch of ladder games and enjoy the game a lot, like for a while there too.
I would say, thinking about it like it's you when you were on your push to Korean GM. So you did the barcode for reasons, a lot of them likely barcode for the same reasons that you did, and it's sort of their practice account. And you could imagine meeting them and talking about that difference of how do you feel the games are different between your barcode and your main account. I know there have been a lot of discussions with Blizzard about, do we want to keep this a thing, and they've changed it a little bit, where now we have a few more incentives for people to barcode less, like ladder heroes. I think that Fear Dragon is doing. But yeah, I would imagine that it's a Terran Vaj or it's a Protoss Vaj. It's you. It's another human being on the ladder who understands the barcoding creates advantages for the way that you play the game, and it's a feature that's just going to exist. So step one would be accepting that barcoding is going to happen and that it is advantageous, and then step two, people will probably do it for the same reason that you did, and it's not necessarily a bad thing. It's not something to be ashamed of, but it is frustrating in that capacity of, why won't you show me your face if I'm showing you my face, kind of thing.
So how do you get frustrated in that kind of way? Do you have to deal with that, or have you just had enough games that you don't really bother with it too much?
I would say it only really annoys me when it's someone who's playing kind of a suspicious, like passive no scouting but countering me kind of style. Aside from that, you can kind of tell. I was watching the Muslim stream yesterday, and he identified 3 of the barcodes he was playing against just based on playstyle. He was like, I think this is Lambo. And then he checked the account, he was like, oh, yep, it's Lambo. And then I think he identified Hero Marine, who was on a barcode as well. So just that sense of, he knows the matchup so well that he can see the player's style shine through the barcode. So it's not really a true way to conceal who you are if you know that person well enough and you're kind of high enough level. I'm not quite that good. Like, I can sometimes say maybe this is epic on his barcode, but it's not good enough. Usually it's like, this is a strong bio player, or this is a dangerous mech player who's aggressive or defensive or whatever. So you can boil it down to the archetype. I think that's one step that you can make that, in a way, humanizes the player a little bit. You think of StarCraft players like musicians, where musicians are specialized in that they have a repertoire of, these are the songs that I've practiced that I can play pretty well. For a Terran, usually they're going to lean toward bio or mech. They're going to be better at one or the other. And that's kind of a representation of them being a human player who didn't get equal time spent practicing bio and mech. You could do the same thing for like an aggressive player or a defensive player. I think one of the coolest additions they could add to StarCraft would be more information on your profile about how many workers you make and what kinds of units you make. They have that in SC2 replay stats, but having it in the client would, I think, take a lot of that edge of barcoding away, where if you play a barcode one time, you can see their profile and get a sense of what their approximate repertoire looks like, as opposed to who this necessarily is.
Right, so I see that. Yeah, I thank you. That actually makes it very clear. And I think that will help for sure. Start thinking about
the repertoire and what they've trained and that kind of thing.
Yeah. I'm just trying to type it in. I forgot how to spell repertoire.
It's
a Frenchies.
Yeah, it's a French word. Good luck. TOIRE.
Oh my god, I got it right. There's no way. There's no way I got it right.
Touchdown.
Oh, it was an E, not an I. Okay. Okay. So, is there anything? So, in terms of like things during the game, what would be like an example? So you'd sit down, you're playing against the barcode. It's the 6th one tonight, right? We've already kind of outlined it, but just so I can write an example here. You've played barcodes all night. You've had an awkward time. You're going 50-50, and you're trying to get the golden ratio, the positive win rate for the night before you go to bed or whatnot. How exactly would you describe, say, you've played against a player who just did a 12 pull, 14 gas bailing attack and killed you. Now you're playing against another Zerg. He's gone for a 3 hatch before pull. Would you identify him as, this guy's a very, greedy Zerg player, and he enjoys pushing it to the late game, holding with few units, things like that? Just try to describe the kind of play style, or?
Yeah, I would say an easy description would be a front foot player versus a back foot player. Generally speaking, like that 12 pull 14 gas player is going to be a front foot player, and they might know a lot of the different cheeses, but the theme is they like to be the attacker because it kind of makes the game linear and they control when the action is happening. And then the back foot player would be someone who likes to challenge the opponent to try and stop me from my growth. I'm just going to try and grow as fast as I can and get to my saturation goal and then max out. And then you also have the difference between risk-seeking and risk-averse. So a risk-averse player wants to play as safe and consistent as possible so their games are stable and they can get to that economy and not really risk their units across the map. And then you have a risk-seeking player who just consistently shoves blindly into situations because they know that a lot of the time it'll pay off. So Avila would be a perfect example of a risk-averse player who a lot of times he'll just make units and just sit them at home, because sometimes if he sends them, a bunch of links around them and his Hellions die. So he just chooses not to send his Hellions, period. Whereas Up a Tree would say, I've shoved my 4 Hellions into the natural a whole bunch, and it works more than it fails, so I'm going to do that every time. So it's risk-seeking versus risk-averse, and then you could have front foot player versus back foot player. And then you could also get into compositions of mech versus bio, Roach Hydra versus Muta player in ZVZ, for example. And then for Protoss, it could be like a Twilight aggressive player versus Skytoss or something like that.
Okay. So, yeah, I think that kind of covers this entire point very well. Just one thing that's slightly not related, but fairly much so. If you're playing against a multitude of barcodes in a night, and you've been playing against some very high MMR players, such as 6K, 5.9, 6.1, and then you're still playing against barcodes. Is there any way that you can? What's a good way to shake off that little bit of anxiety that you get because you've just played against some fantastic players that have completely outplayed you, right? Like those are the best games because you just kind of hands on the keyboard and mouse. You're like, all right, this is over, I guess. But afterwards, you play them maybe another one, and then you're trying to ladder again, and you're like, well, I don't want to play against the same guy. He just completely destroyed me.
Well, the way that I think about that is you tend to develop the most as a player when you're playing someone who's better than you, which it's flipped because you feel rewarded most usually when you're winning your games. But that's more of when you're representing that your training can beat a certain caliber of player, as opposed to when you're playing the better player, more of your weaknesses are pointed out. So it would be like playing against the better player means you can take a few more notes about, all right, my queens are out of position against this 5-minute attack. I need to have 4 of them at my third and 1 in the main to defend the Liberator, and my Ling Bane at the natural. If you're against a worse player, they may not punish that, and then you might not know that it's a mistake. So against a better player, a lot of times I'll have the mindset of, I'm about to discover more of my flaws that a 5.3k Terran would not show me, but this 6k Terran will make painfully obvious. And it's less fun, so it's kind of like, buckle up, embrace the suck, this is going to be shitty, and I'm going to get picked apart back and forth, but if I can get 1 or 2 notes on the first couple things that cause me to fall behind, then I move forward from this experience a better player than I was. Whereas if you're beating up on someone who's like 200 to 500 MR below you, it's nice to win games, and it feels good to crush the opponent and kill their buildings and that kind of thing. But for your improvement over time, it's not as beneficial.
Hey. I think I think that kind of covers the first point here. Thank you for that.
Cool.
The next point that was on the email was how do you tackle the fact that once achieving the goals that I had set myself, I can't, after achieving the goals that I had set, I am not satisfied or happy with the progress that occurred.
Mm-hmm.
So, for an example, I was not happy. I seem to find, in StarCraft 2, you try to find flaws in your play, like we just said, right? You play against a better player, you find your flaws, you improve. That's part of the game, why everybody likes it so much, right? How can you stop yourself from being so critical of yourself that even when you set your goal, Korean GM, you sit back, you're like, all right, I got Korean GM, but I mean, it was on a barcode. Like a lot of these games were macro games, like you use 1312 too much. At what point can you? I don't know how to even address this question. I was struggling to write it in the email as well.
I think I know what you're getting at, though, and you get to see this a lot with certain streamers who achieve something at one point but no longer retain that. Like, I believe Loco has been GM in the past, but he's not generally in GM. So a lot of people can ask, why are you not GM? Livy B, same thing. Miss Spite, you get the same kind of thing of, why are you not at your peak right now? Almost everyone is not at their peak right now, which is kind of an interesting thing to point out. Everyone has their peaks and their valleys in terms of their form as a player, and whether or not you can be at a peak depends on time and with what seriousness you're kind of pursuing that goal. So just because you're massing a bunch of games doesn't mean that you're setting yourself up to be the most successful in your career. One of the reasons that I was the most successful at the team house with Polt and Violet wasn't because they were helping me that much. Violet helped me a little bit. Polt basically didn't help me at all. It was mainly because I treated the practice as a more serious thing where I would prepare before, like get my body ready, make sure I knew what I was working on. I would exercise, I would have my coffee, I would meditate, I would do yoga. It was like the real deal. Like, I'm gonna fight some people samurai style. As opposed to a lot of times you kind of loaf out of bed, you have your breakfast and coffee, and then you fire up the game and you just start playing. But it's not quite in the same capacity of, I want to try and do what the professionals do and treat this as a very important time. So that's the one aspect. And then the other aspect is also just, how many hours do I have to dedicate? Because at certain points, you don't have as much time as you had in other capacities. So you shouldn't really expect the same results. And everyone likes to think of themselves as the best version of themselves. So like, when I was at the team house, I was around rank 50 GM for a while. So a lot of us like to think of ourselves as, oh, that's the kind of player I am if I dedicated the time. But I'm not top 50 GM right now. I'm like rank 140 to rank 100, generally speaking. So it kind of depends on how hard are you willing to push to create a new peak for yourself. No one can take your past achievement away from you. You've been Korean GM, that's awesome. Like, that's a fact. It doesn't really matter how you got it. You did get it. So that's something that stays, but I think there's more satisfaction in the experience. So the games that you're playing right now tend to matter more than the games that you played a few months ago or last year. There's no time like the present. It's a lot more emotionally salient. There's more going on. Experience is more vibrant and vivid in the present moment. So the past achievement, it's the most exciting right when you get it, and it becomes less and less exciting over time. I think that's part of why you have those types of people in the world who are constantly talking about their past achievements, is perhaps they did earn that, but they don't feel satisfied, so they tell people about it over and over and over again to get that satisfaction, to try and get some more value from the effort that they put forth, as opposed to saying, all right, what's my next goal? So I would pose that question to you. What is your next goal? Like, what are you trying to achieve with StarCraft now?
Well, as of last year, I finished off my postgraduate for uni, so I've had a much more time to put into StarCraft 2 now. And I did a bunch of casting, so I kind of filled that role last year. pushing that into 2018 as well. But I've recently been trying to play in a bunch of tournaments and play for WCS as well. I recently got a new team playing for them. We got a couple sponsors, and we played in the ANZ Pro League as well. We came third. So in terms of what my goal is I kind of want to be competitive in the Australia New Zealand scene again. Back the last time I was really up there was when I was in high school. So that's a while ago, back in like mid wings, like 2011 or so, where the game was still kind of growing. So I want to reach a level where I can say, you know, I'm one of the best in this region, and you know, start winning things, start making, you know, getting achievements again is like the biggest thing, especially now that I got the time to do it, because I wasn't able to before.
What are your edges going to be with that time? How are you going to distinguish yourself? Because everyone who wants to get Challenger is going to play lots of games. So what is your edge?
You cut out there for a second. What is my what?
What is your edge? What is your aspect of your practice that distinguishes the practice of other players that would allow you to achieve those things?
Well, I'm not a very grindy player. I don't sit down and play about 40 ladder games at a time. I generally play until I lose, and then I'll kind of sit down and analyze every single part of the build and look at, in particular, what kind of attacks that I can do against someone that executes my opponent's build better. So in that way, I'm pretty good at sniping particular opponents and particular matchups. So, for example, back in Heart of the Swarm, there was a very particular build against Bio on maps like, do you remember? It looked like Prion Terraces, but they spawn in different spots. But generally big maps, you could get Roach Speed and Bane Speed and hit with 1-1. In terms of my play, I think I'm really good at kind of inventing new timing attacks and refining them to a point where they can pretty much beat players that are way better than me. So in terms of saying, you know, I want to be WCS Challenger, that's not a big thing, right? Like, it means, okay, if you know who you're going to play before, you can prepare in such a way after watching a couple of their replays or like seeing how the meta is currently and constructing a build and performing it really well when needed. If you don't know who you're playing, or you get unlucky and you don't get to play against the person you want to, you just kind of fall flat on your face unless you grind out a bunch of games. So I'm in terms of putting in more time now, I think I want to improve myself and, you know, discover big things that I can hopefully improve on myself and make better.
Do you
rather
have
than
any...
bring in things I already have. Sorry, yes?
Are you doing aim booster or any kind of mouse practice? Just mouse control and accuracy?
Well, currently, that's why I sent you the email. That's the part of the third question that I have here. So, I mean, we kind of already glossed over it. So, prepare for your goals. So, understand how you can tackle the problem and figure out a routine before playing in order to feel fresh, and even playing when you are on, even playing during those less than desirable days. So, what kind of mouse aim booster things would you recommend?
Okay, so did you feel satisfied with the second question first before we move on? I didn't mean to skip ahead, but
I mean, they kind of linked.
Yeah.
I mean, with the thing that you said is, if you're preparing for your goals and you're striving to set them rather than kind of, you know, I felt like I accidentally fell on Korean GM because I accidentally found the recipe, which was barcoding and cheesing a lot. And so I feel like preparing, I think, is a logical step now. I think we can go to the third one.
Okay, cool. So the thing that I think links in with brain science is working memory function. Working memory is what is kind of your RAM in your brain, what you're currently thinking about, what has recently happened. And you're talking about the difference between a fresh start day versus a day where you've done some stuff and you're not feeling on point. One of the things that helps me a whole bunch is cutting out a lot of stimulus for a while. So instead of just going from I ran some errands and I did some work. I did some work around the apartment and stuff. And then now I want to play some StarCraft. If I take a minute or two with no music and I close my eyes, it allows me to get a little soft reset where I get to clear that headspace so that I can fill it with StarCraft again. I think that's one of the most difficult aspects of managing your approach to this game is we have Facebook, we have Twitter, we have Reddit, we have our real life obligations and our friends and what people are talking about in the news, and there's just so much to process that when you get into the game, you have a lot of background functioning that your brain is doing of what's been going on in my life, how am I feeling in my mood, all this other kind of stuff that eats away at that resource. So taking a few minutes before you play to clear the headspace will give you a lot more attentional resource to focus on the task at hand. I definitely feel punished when I don't do that. I just feel like my head is somewhere else. I forget a lot of my upgrades. I forget my supply timings. I get supply blocked a whole bunch more when I'm playing StarCraft after doing other stuff. But if I do a little bit of exercise and if I give myself a little bit of meditation time, it tends to clear out the headspace a lot better.
So what in terms of time then, since you mentioned it, how much time do you think should be allocated for StarCraft? Because at least I've found out that first game is usually, not the best. There's a bunch of things that go wrong, win or loss, right? Second game, you start, tackling those initial things that you were mucking up and you discover a couple more. Your third game is probably the freshest you are during your ladder session. Also, that's what I found, is because everything's starting to go right. You're starting to feel good. And then you get about 3-4 games in there after that one, which are just kind of all right. And then you start, getting a bit, at least I do, in terms of my stamina after a day at work. Start feeling really tired, and I give it quits at about 2 hours. Do you think 2 hours is like a good amount or too much after a day like that? Because sometimes, even if I start the day off really well, say I go 8-2, if I win 8 games at the start, my last 2 games are losses, I just feel like absolute garbage. Do you think there might be, not hitting that 2-hour timing would be better, or allocating less time for myself but doing it every single day, or?
Well, the most kind of accurate approach would be respecting that kind of as a range as opposed to a static value, because some days go easier than other days and you have more energy certain days than others. So kind of listening to your body and figuring out what your range is. So maybe if you had a fairly easy day or things went well and you're in a good mood, maybe you could go a little bit over 2 hours. Or if things are particularly shitty, you could do a little bit less. Or you could do some practice in some custom games and just do some max outs. I think that's one of the things that I would like to be doing more, and I should kind of be consistent about it, is my practice over a day tends to be way better if I just play one custom game and get maxed in a matchup kind of to prepare for a macro game. It allows me to focus purely on my injects and really get into that mental rhythm. So that could be another time efficient way to do something that's a little bit lower emotion, lower stress, where you're not kind of throwing yourself and your MMR to the ladder and seeing, am I going to come out ahead or behind from this? It's more of just, I'm getting my mind in the mental rhythm of the 30-second inject and creep timer and the supply, and focusing on those basic things before I get into the real games. So if I could say what my ideal warm-up routine would be, it would involve good rest before, like if I'm starting in the morning, or a little bit of meditation if I have the work day ahead of time or a bunch of errands and stuff. So you need to be rested and prepared, and then food, coffee, water, just like your basic homeostasis stuff. I don't know about you, but I play like shit if I'm hungry. Like, I can often tell if I go over the 4-hour mark in my stream and I start getting hungry, I forget a bunch of stuff and I play slower. And it's basically my stomach saying, we're in active protest until you get some food in your belly kind of thing.
Yeah, I typically just get mad at myself. And then I'm like, oh yeah, that's time to eat now.
So then the other one would be Aim Booster. So I do the challenge mode in Aim Booster. It's a very simple website. You just go to the website, click challenge, and then I try to get around 300 hits. It depends on what your mouse control is like and getting used to the game and stuff. But this, for one, helps me improve my mouse accuracy. For 2, it also tells me how focused I am right in that moment.
Mm.
So if I'm hitting way below my average, I know that I'm not quite focused and I should maybe clear my head a little bit more or do a couple more trials on this to kind of get connected with my keyboard and mouse, because there are instruments basically. It's the tools that we use to be successful and make things happen in the game. And if you do the mouse accuracy drill and you're doing it like shit, then that's kind of an indication that you're not connected with your mouse, and when you get into games, it's not going to be as good as usual for you.
Is there any point where it's feasible to say today is probably not when I'm gonna be playing? Because I mentioned it in the email. It's gotten to the point where now, at least when I was working, now I'm on break, so I'm playing every day. Some days is just like I can't play right now. I just can't get on top of it. Is there a time and place to just kind of give up like that, or at least play like a game? Should I set some sort of a minimum threshold?
I wouldn't say give up in those terms. More like you could use it as a study day. So instead of massing games yourself and practicing your mechanics, if you know that you're really off point, you could study. Like, I watched one of Stefano's games before I played today, just as a way of getting to see the pace of the game and watch someone who's better than me develop that kind of thing, as opposed to just jumping on the ladder immediately. So you could do more study. You could also kind of practice some more builds. You could also play unranked, so the points don't matter as much. But there's nothing shameful about taking a day off and studying instead of playing. I think that's kind of a little bit of the macho attitude of a lot of gamers of, oh, if you don't play more games, then you're just a wuss and you should be stronger with your fortitude or whatever. I think that's pretty stupid. It's missing the whole human element.
I don't think that's the argument that I'm trying to make. I think, at least what I'm trying to say is, at some point you have to play.
Yeah.
Right? Like, especially if you want to play and you really want to get better and you're enjoying the game, especially if the metagame's kind of swinging to things that you enjoy. Like, at some point you have to say, no, you're playing today.
Yeah, I would guess that if you have, like, the time to play StarCraft full-time, you should treat it like a job in terms of how many hours are dedicated toward either study or gameplay. So that's how I've been structuring my stream lately, where I do 8 hours a day, 5 days a week, which is the same as a standard working person in the US. And sometimes I'll study a bit off stream here and there, but if I want to be successful as a streaming business, I should be putting in the business hours. And then for StarCraft, if you're not streaming and you're trying to get, say, WCS Challenger, you should be using other people's time expenditure as a reference and then kind of playing around that. If you're doing a little bit less time than the other people in ANZ who are trying to go for Challenger, your time should be more efficient. Like, you should be studying more and you should have better plans for what's going on, because you're saying you're less grindy than the average person.
Yeah, if you Probe, I think, had like 100 games on the first day of the season. It was ridiculous. Just write that down. So, back to the routine. When you say rest, is that what you were talking about, your soft reset? Or are you physically lying down for 15 minutes?
I don't think physically lying down would help. I think that would actually slow you down. I tend to feel groggy if I lay down and then get up and play, just because of the way that the blood flow works in the body, standing up or seated versus sitting or lying down. One thing that has been represented in a lot of psychology journals is if you can stand up with kind of a confident stance, you're generally going to perform better just by virtue of putting your body in a confident position. If you think about humans, biologically speaking, we're bipeds, so we're usually standing up when we're doing our business, hunting or fighting or gathering, whatever. So StarCraft as a seated thing is kind of a new aspect of competition where we're trying to win at a violent video game, but it's from a seated position. So I think taking a little bit and just standing up, opening your chest, getting some full breaths, and maybe stretching a little bit helps a whole bunch with kind of getting ready. one of the things I really love about Jaedong when he was going to play in tournaments and stuff is the way that he looks physically. Is that he could, if the admin said, all right, now this match is a fist fight, I feel like he would be very successful in that he looks physically ready for whatever conflict he has with his opponent. He looks like he could fight them in the moment just because he has that intensity, and he connects with his body and says, this is a physical discipline. My body is ready to do whatever it has to. I'm in the fight or flight kind of situation. And being able to wake your body up and get ready for real competition, I think, has a lot of value. So it's the mixture between closing your eyes a little bit and getting the reset of your working memory, but then also getting your blood flow going a little bit so that you could be ready to fight if you had to. Jaedong mode, yeah. Like 20 or 30 push-ups kind of does that for me. Mm-hmm. And I've started going for runs every day before I stream. It tends to help a whole bunch. I just tend to be more accurate, and I'm also less stressed. They've done some studies on your cortisol levels. If you do 5 minutes of cardio, it keeps your stress levels lower than they would be for the entire day, which is pretty extreme and pretty awesome. So if you can do that, I would guess that would take a big edge off of the tilt, and also just connect yourself with your body.
Yeah, it doesn't help that I've been injured for a little bit here, so I haven't been able to go to the gym past couple of weeks.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Well, good. Is there any particular type of food that's good? So say you've already eaten for the day, right? So I get home, I work either in the morning or in the late afternoon. That's just, how the coaching works. And so sometimes I'm back at 9 o'clock in the evening or 5 o'clock in the evening. So if it's at 9, I've already eaten. So is there any type of food that I can have, later in the day that can, keep me awake at least for like 2 hours? Anything that you recommend? And is there anything different from my own diet, which is just kind of meat and green stuff?
I just eat meat. I'm a carnivore.
Like today, I literally just ate chicken and broccoli. Like that's all I had today.
Mm-hmm. I think carbs generally are not the best in the evening. If you can, and this is kind of, I'm not a nutritionist, so I don't really have official advice on this, but the way that I structure it is I have my breakfast as my largest meal, and then lunch is the middle, and then dinner is generally the smallest. So that kind of depends on your metabolism and what feels good to you. But if you're playing after you had dinner, I would probably focus on drinking water as opposed to having food, because you're saying like a 2-hour session if you're playing after dinner as opposed to the full day kind of practice session.
That you do, yeah.
Yeah. Tea is also a really good option. I think to kind of draw on the book Art of Learning, he talks about building a trigger, which is creating a sequence of actions, kind of like a ritual before you play, that clues your body and your mind into, we're about to enter a performance state. And if you can create that sequence in a way of like adding things in that get you going, then it won't be quite as big of an effort when you jump into the games, because your body already kind of has those clues of, I did a little bit of exercise, I meditated a little bit, I had some green tea, it's time to go. So that's helped me quite a bit, is having some green tea or coffee. Usually there's performance that follows that, so I'm less surprised by it.
Since we're kind of like around this topic, then what are your opinions on stimulants like coffee and stuff? Especially at that time of the night, I just avoid it like the plague. But I find that it generally really helps my play if I'm able to have some coffee, if it's like, a little couple letter games before I go to work or something.
The half-life of breaking down the caffeine from coffee is quite long, so it depends on how heavy of a sleeper you are. Some people aren't really affected by it that much. I'm pretty affected, so I try not to drink any caffeine if it's the second half of my day. I would just focus on water, generally.
So
But
so what I've found with coffee is if I've had a bit too much, I kind of get, I mean, this is practically my degree, but I'm asking you anyway. Um, you get the shakes, you get agitated, you get irritated. Uh, in terms of StarCraft, what do you think is a point where you go, all right, no more coffee, or no coffee is good for me? Like, at what point during the day? So I come home from work, I have the StarCraft game. How do I decide whether to have a coffee or not? In terms of how I'm feeling right then, is there anything that you wake up and you're like, okay, I'm gonna have some tea, and then you have some tea and you're like, all right, time for a coffee, and then you kind of think for a second and you don't quite feel like it's a good time for it?
well,
Is it?
there's the performance curve, right? Where if you're
Mhm.
not, we're using the psychology arousal. If you're not aroused enough, then you're not going to be playing as fast as you need to. And if you have too much of a stimulant, you're over aroused and kind of shaky, which causes you to play worse as well. So you kind of have that middle ground of you're stimulated enough to perform well, but you're not overstimulated.
Mhm.
And that kind of depends on volume of how much stimulant you have and timing of when you're having it, and also your body personally and how you process that, because some people are very strongly affected by caffeine, some people aren't affected by it that much. If
Yeah.
I have a big coffee, like the amount that I normally have, and I have a green tea right after it, it gets me kind of into the a little bit shaky zone where I can feel a little bit overstimulated. But then if I give myself like an hour, then I kind of get into a really good groove after that. So that's something that I think you probably know more about how your body works to know what makes sense. But I would prefer not to have coffee or tea, anything after the first half of my day. First half is when I would usually have that.
Okay, well, I guess that kind of covers this last part about making a routine, even on those less than desirable days, talking about um, using the time efficiently, even when you're not feeling great, studying replays, maxing versus AI, being able to test yourself, have a soft reset, try to have a lack of stimuli to bring your mind focused, things like that. So that's really good for that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Um, coming back into the second point here to finish off. So, we've taken a full hour. I thought it was going to be about 30 minutes. My apologies.
No problem.
Um, coming back, is my goal achievable?
Technically, yes, it is achievable. It's harder than I think you'll think it's going to be. It's easier to
Hmm.
set a goal than it is to reach the goal. And I'm wearing Bruce Lee's shirt. I would quote him here and say, a goal is not always meant to be reached. It can simply serve as something to aim at. So you don't really have anything to lose in the sense of if you have time and you have the resource to try and achieve this goal, like you're not putting yourself at point of ruin to try and push for Challenger, I'm guessing.
No.
If that's
I
the
mean, I
case,
can't.
then this I would say is kind of your training in warriorship. Like in medieval times, it was the period where you're a young person, you're at your physical peak, and you can try and see how good of a fighter can you be. So this is your chance now. You're not actively going to go out as a knight with armor and a sword and kill people, but you can play StarCraft and see how good can I be in the kind of grand scheme of a competitive esport. And StarCraft is really cool in the sense of you're not dependent on your team's performance for how high you can potentially go. So I would have the attitude of discovery, of how effective can I possibly be with how hard I'm willing to work.
So, in terms of that, I
I
find
think
it
you
really
can
good
based on
to
the games
write.
that we've played and stuff.
Sorry, I was talking over you like an idiot.
I think that you can based on the games that we've had together. Like there are certain cases where someone is maybe a little bit slow of hand, where it's not really realistic, and I would guess that it would be kind of hard for me to say that to someone in a voice chat with a session like
mean,
this. But I honestly think that you can if you work hard. You have to work really hard,
yeah.
like hard to where maybe it's a little bit less fun, kind of hard. But I think it's possible.
the way that I've always been able to achieve goals, especially when I was studying, is to write out like a single sentence and make the goal like ridiculously simple.
Mm-hmm.
So, what should the sentence be here? Is it just, you know, win the WCS ANZ Challenger? Because that's pretty, far away. The guys here practice a lot. They're really good, and I mean, I just want to get into the playoffs and do well there. Should I set a lower goal, like a stepping stone? And if so, well, I think it is. So, what is that stepping stone? I'm not entirely sure. Do you have an idea of
Have
what
you
that
been
could
6K before?
be? No, highest I was 5.7.
Yeah, okay, well that's mine. So how about this?
Oh,
How
okay.
about I race you there? Because I would like to get
Oh, yeah.
better too. So 6K MMR on what server? KR or NA?
Yeah, I don't think KR is very feasible. A lot of the ANZ guys haven't hit KR yet.
Okay.
6K.
Okay, so we'll say NA.
We'll say NA for now, yeah.
Okay.
Alright. 6K. NA.
The highest I've been is 5.8. I think I got 58.50 one time, but I've never hit 5.9. And I'm like 5.4 to 5.5 now. Because I'm on a downswing.
Yeah, on Korea, I was 5.5, like, at the start of December. And now, even on my barcode, I'm on 5.2. I don't know what's happening. It was a huge slump. But yeah, thanks for this. I'm not sure if the chat wants the document, but I mean I can put it in there as to view if they'd like. But it's all written up here.
Sure, well I'm fine with that. If you want to.
Okay. There's no like doxing happening. It's just one link to aim booster.
Virus checker. There was actually someone who accused me of hacking in Overwatch when I think it was someone complaining about missing a whole bunch, and I linked aim booster, and they were like, "I'm not gonna use a hack for aims. It's just to exercise." Well, cool. Good talking with you.
Yes, thank you for that. I'll email you later with confirmation of all that stuff. But
Sweet.
cheers, and have a good snack. I guess it's breakfast for you, so enjoy your breakfast.
Yep.
And have a good stream. I'll be watching.
Thanks, dude. Keep it real.
Have a good one.
Cool. That was a fun discussion. Burp, burp, burp. It's nice talking to Vaj. He came into it very prepared.